Hello again. I'm Kenny Fikes back with you guys again. I'm your host of the iKnowMedia Roundtable, where we bring you conscientious clarity along with empirical experience alongside reasoned application and analysis. How are you today, Elisa Simmons, and who are you?
Kenny, I'm doing great. Hey guys, I'm Elisa Simmons. I'm a Montessori guide and school owner in East Texas and a mom of two. How are you?
Michael?
I'm Michael Malowski. I am a pediatrician from in Denver, Colorado, parent of 7, and very excited to be part of the conversation, as always.
Great. Well, happy anniversary. We missed you last time because I think that you were celebrating it with your wife. So
We were 26th anniversary.
great. Well, I'm going to start the show by saying if we had a name, we might call it Donald Trump. Crazy or crazy like a fox? Crazy like a fox. So I will tell you that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I've never really been one to believe in these clandestine meetings and back alleys and back rooms, or that people even had the power and sort of impetus and discipline to carry out conspiracist type theories. However, maybe it's not a conspiracy, it's just a doggone plan. It feels like Trump is leading us down a path into martial law, and it seems to be exact. You know, we've noticed over the years, militia style people out in the woods, you know, guys, primarily white guys in the Southeast with their ATVs, playing war games in the woods with their rifles and assault weapons. What are they doing in private that we haven't been privy to? What types of moves are being made? It just feels like Trump has unleashed a place where it's fashionable to be racist again. So many people are emboldened that weren't emboldened again. It seems like I see more Confederate flags than I used to. And so that became the flavor du jour again over the last few years. And now as things are happening with his Department of Justice Attorney General, it seems that it's okay for white men to walk around with assault rifles and no one's doing anything about it. I mentioned in the last show that folks like me get stopped for driving and asking if we have a license to drive, where people aren't getting stopped to say, hey, do you have permission to have that assault rifle? And just as the emboldenedness was happening to be racist, it almost feels like now he's about to unleash people to be violent in the name of protecting law and order and calling protesters anarchists. And it just feels really scary. So let's start with that, guys. What do you have to say about that, Michael? Why don't you start off?
You know, it's funny. I'm only reading it here or there. I understand the bigger picture. I'd like to at least put this in the context of the bigger story. At least this week is the story of that 17-year-old kid. I don't even remember his name. Do you guys remember his name? The one
Kyle something.
You know, I think that what's appalling to me is that this is a minor with an assault rifle who traveled far from his home to involve himself in a situation that didn't involve him in a weapon he shouldn't have had in the first place. And that you're right, there was no one ever stopped him at any point along the way to confront him and question his reasons or for being there and having what he has. When in fact we hear from African-American doctors, astronauts, the thing Kenny sent to me, at every single level, everywhere in this country, every single African-American is telling us that they're experiencing the exact same thing, which is every single one has experienced being inappropriately stopped for absolutely no reason, for being targeted for what seems to be being nothing but being black and in the wrong place. And here is a white kid from the Midwest who can travel 40 miles or so to a distant place with an illegal weapon he shouldn't have, to involve himself in something he never should have been. And that to me is what is overwhelmingly blatant and stupid about this entire thing. And I know that he inserted himself into a militia group that was there that inserted themselves because they self-appointed protectors of private property, which is also completely bananas. So that's where I have the biggest issue with this topic.
Well, one of the things I love about getting your input, Michael, is that it's not, you're clearly not aloof on these things, but you're clearly not really typically politically involved in your life. And so we really get this fresh perspective from someone who's not watching MSNBC all day or watching Fox News all day. You read it, you scrub it, and it becomes a thorough analysis for you. And that's what we hope to have. And so I appreciate that. Elisa, what do you got?
I think what people need to realize, the people who may not agree with what they consider my political views about this topic, is that there is an underlying danger to this that's been proven historically as recent as, I think it was in Charlottesville, when the person who decided the protest was inappropriate plowed a car through people. We have historic evidence that will prove that when people that tend to lean left or Democratic are protesting something, that people who tend to lean super far right will take arms and stop it with violence. It's been proven. And I'm not saying that there's not people on the left side that will do stuff, or the Democratic side that will do inappropriate stuff too. But I think that that's where, for people who, I try to stay real centered on all of my thoughts, and I really try to look at everything from both sides. And for when you're defending the 17-year-old Kyle, and you don't call him a thug, and you don't imply that he's a man, but Trayvon Martin was a thug. And it's like, well, wait a minute. How do you make that comparison? Why does this boy get the benefit of the doubt when he illegally had a gun? Nothing else matters after that. The people who are saying that he went to this town to try to protect the buildings, he went illegally. He stepped out of his house with a gun, and he was not allowed to have the gun. And I think that for people who are trying their hardest to stay you can't stay on the middle of this, but for people who are trying to wait until all the evidence is out, it's, why does he get the benefit of the doubt? But Jacob, the guy who got shot in the back, we don't give him the benefit of the doubt. We gave the cops the benefit of the doubt. We don't give anybody with brown or black skin the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's what I've spent most of my weekend and week trying to convince people. We don't give black and brown people the benefit of the doubt. And it's dangerous.
I think it's interesting that you say you spend the weekend trying to convince them. I think it's pretty obvious. They tell you themselves. If you ask a person what happened in Trayvon Martin case, or what happened, they'll tell you, why was he wearing what he was wearing? Why was he walking through that neighborhood? He should have just complied, to a guy who's not an officer. And they always give you the answer. So what I'm noticing, it's a little bit of repetitious, but we're getting policy changes. We're getting a lot of rhetoric, which is the hate and mean stuff that, Michael, you pointed out in that video that was, I think, in Mississippi or Alabama somewhere, where the guy had the Black Lives Matter sign.
It was Arkansas, yeah. It was outside of Target.
It was Arkansas. Sorry, folks, to lump those things together for this purpose. We're getting a lot of fear that you see in the convention that just happened, the RNC. And we're starting to get violence. And the president of the United States will not even condemn that violence. So he's emboldened followers to feel comfortable with racism. And now he's inciting them to violence. And I feel like they are intentionally undoing what has been done in the last 150 or 100 years or so. I talked about Birth of a Nation, that original film, how it struck fear in the nation about Black and brown people and minorities, primarily black people, black men in the South. And it just seems like we're going towards that again. I think Steve Bannon from Bartwright has been at the heart of a lot of this from the beginning. And although he's not technically in the administration, I think he still has a lot to do with it. So why don't you kind of weigh in on some of that, Michael?
You know, I think when it comes from, I'm just going to focus on the idea of leadership, because I think the biggest thing that you pointed out is whenever any of these issues come in front of our commander-in-chief, he never misses an opportunity to somehow, in an indelicate way, promote it. No, he's not cheerleading him, but he's always asking, well, what's wrong with what he did? I've heard they like me. I heard they think highly of me. It's always he refuses, because, and we can all speculate as to why. I don't want to get too deep down conspiracy theory rabbit holes and deep state stuff, but it's clear that he is so focused on just whoever supports me, whatever they do, I can't afford or won't speak up, even if it's morally reprehensible. And so the leadership and the voice that's coming from the top is absolutely in a tacit way promoting it by not condemning it. When you stay silent, you are promoting. You're promoting what's happening by staying silent. And that to me is the loudest, most difficult, most maddening thing about this entire, all of these things that are occurring around the country and coalescing into this one big, train heading towards the election is the voice from the top, or lack thereof.
What do you think, Elisa?
If you watch the videos of the protests and the counter protests that are happening, or the riots, and I would refer to counter riots that are happening recently in Portland. You saw the 200 Trump trucks drive into Portland, flags blazing, and then you saw the protesters who got in front of these dualies. Like, that was silly. But you see them. This is where, and this is what when I was saying I was trying to convince people. The reason why this is becoming so personal for me is because I do live in East Texas, and I know that it's still here. And when the people here that have been suppressing their racism, or they realize that it's not politically correct, when they see these videos of happening in Portland, they're not paying attention to the fact that when you watch the majority of the videos that contain violence, it is the right-wing white guys and right-wing left guys, and they're going together and having these violent acts. Well, for me, the scariest part is that in where I'm living, no one's interpreting that. They're not saying that this is far left white guys colliding. They're saying we have to protect ourselves because we're openly saying Black Lives Matter above everybody else, and I matter too. And so their rage and anger is my fear going to make them believe that we're having a race war, and that race war is where my son and my husband are the targets, and I can't, like, that's why I'm so passionate about it, because it's like you've got to understand how decisive Trump's speech is. We have a president who shared a video where they said white power, and he, as Michael pointed out, stayed silent about that. He never spoke out against that video that he shared.
He retweeted it. He retweeted it and then refused to own it.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that silence is so dangerous.
So Michael mentioned maybe not going down the hole of deep state. And I said I'm not a conspiracy theorist at the top. Here's what I think. I really believe it's happening right in front of our faces. There are so many things that have happened in the last 3 years. It's not funny when you get serious about it, but it's so ridiculous that it created a little humor in me, even though it's actually scary.
Yeah.
That I thought to myself, this can't really happen, can it? Oh my goodness, this is happening. That can't really happen, can it? Oh my goodness, that's really happening. So he began by coming down an escalator and saying these brown people are rapists and thugs and drug dealers. And then he started changing policy and saying, this is what we're going to do about it. We're going to stack the court system. So what does this look like? Does it look like 2020 or 1920 when you have judges that will do the will of the racist Southeast, and then you have people that will commit violence against Black people, and the powers that be won't say anything, and the policies are written in a certain way? I think so. Let's say, I'm sorry, guys. Let's take a pause and welcome my guest.
All right.
Are we there?
I see a name.
I see that name. Mr. Conrad Tillett, how are you, my friend?
How are you, my brother Kenny Pikes? How's everything?
Wonderful, wonderful. So good to see you. We are here taking our little proverbial bite of the elephant, trying to keep the conversation going.
I'm happy to be here.
Are you in New York today?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Well, guys, let me give you a little introduction and then let him tell you a little something about himself. But I met Conrad as a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania, where he was then and remains one of my favorite people on the planet Earth, because I think of his passion and his zeal for people and his fight for Black people throughout his life for justice and doing what's right. And I'll tell you a little point of levity that I add many times is levity, but it's true. So when I got to college, I was this big old sort of immature boy, maybe smart academically, and Conrad was like, you know, he was my peer because we're in school together, but he was a whole lot more mature than I. And so he taught me a lot and shaped a lot of my view and fashioned a lot of my thoughts about politics and power and social justice. And so I thank him for that because I carry a lot of that with me today. Conrad, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am the senior minister of the Flatbush Tompkins Congregational Church in Brooklyn, New York. That's in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn. I'm also the host of a radio show in Harlem called Conversations with Conrad. And I'm also an adjunct at City College. I teach in the Black Studies department there.
Nice. And for others, both Conrad and I were African American Studies majors at the University of Pennsylvania.
That's right. That's right.
I'm sorry?
No, I said that's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I think that while it was a discipline in several universities across the country, the advent of people becoming a major in Africana Studies or African American Studies is now a lot more popular than it was at that time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
PhD programs and everything else now.
That's right. So what we're talking about today primarily is, I wanted to discuss the idea of, I would almost ask the question, am I crazy? Because I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but what I think I see happening and unfolding right in front of our eyes is a president who came down an escalator and said, here's what I think about certain people, and then started stacking the courts, and then emboldened folks to be racist again and outwardly. And now it seems like he's stoking violence. It feels like he's specifically and purposefully and intentionally turning back the hands of time to almost invoke something like martial law when it's time to elect a new president or for him to win, so that he has a reason to stay in power. So anything you want to add about that or the recent happenings by the 17-year-old gunman, et cetera, please chime in, whatever you got. That's for you, Conrad.
Oh, for me. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm a newbie, so I wanted to had to say. Well, I think, of course, you know, what more can be said about the temperament of the president, and what more can really be said about the chaos that has been wrought in the land, and therefore I tend not to say what has been said so much and what's often said on every channel, and that's Trump is the worst thing that ever happened to the world. But I tend to say that, first of all, I believe, first of all, that our republic, the Constitution, the republic is strong enough to withstand any circumstances. So I don't join most people in being concerned that we're going to have a constitutional crisis. I believe that when the election takes place, we will have a peaceful transfer of power, as we always do. I'm a bit concerned that we will not have any results in terms of who the president is the night of the election, as we become accustomed to. I think with the increased voting, and oops, did I get lost? Am I still there? Oh,
No, you're here.
I think we're going to have a bit of upheaval, but I don't share the sort of panic. I think that, as I have said to Democrats, I live in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, the most Democratic county in America. And I've been saying consistently that what the Democrats have to do, what Biden has to do, is to keep articulating a vision for America, keep articulating an optimistic and positive message for America. And I think that is the antidote to Trump. But I think that here's one of the things I'm concerned about, Kenny. I have done I've been active in politics personally since 1984. I supported at the time Reverend Jesse L. Jackson when he ran for president. One of the things I've noticed, and this is of concern to me, and I think that's why we're going to have to really marshal all of the Democratic forces, is that typically Democrats win when there is a optimistic, hopeful candidate, someone that is refreshing and new. If we go back to 1960, Jack Kennedy won that election because he represented something new, the cutting edge, the next thing. And when you look at the Democrat Party, whenever we run the person that's whose turn it is and who's supposed to be the next person or person in line, we haven't done so well. Hubert Humphrey didn't do so well in 68. It took Jimmy Carter in 76, a governor from Georgia who had bragged that he had never even spent the night in Washington, a peanut farmer. He was new and fresh, and we won again. Then we ran a string of good candidates, Fritz Mondale, Michael Dukakis, but they were the folks in line and they didn't really represent something optimistic. And it took us to have William Jefferson Clinton to come back and win the White House for the Democrats. And then, of course, Barack Obama represented the same thing. So I'm just concerned, and I know that other folks are concerned about these other things. What I'm concerned about is getting the numbers, people out to vote. In New York, we already know what the outcome is going to be. But let
me interject.
Let me just say this last point, and then I'm finished. This last point, and I'm finished. We elect presidents by the Electoral College, not by the popular vote, and we have to have Electoral College strategy in order to win the presidency.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we're going to come right back to you. I didn't invite you on to cut you off. I just wanted to
no problem.
let Michael and Elisa respond to some of the things you said, because there's a lot of things in there. I wish I shared your optimism right now, but I feel like I've been watching this man dismantle democracy by doing things like, so when I thought that the institutions could hold, then I watched him put in his Roy Cohn as Attorney General. When I thought the institutions could hold, I watched him fire sequentially inspectors general and things of that nature. When I thought the institution could hold, I watched Brett Kavanaugh thumb his nose at at congressional oversight, and so on and so forth. Mike, you want to chime in, and then let Elisa go there, and we'll go back. Right.
I wanted to ask Mr. Schiller's opinion as a Orthodox Jew and someone who is a person of faith, and I know that you are too, and I know that many of my people inhabit the Brooklyn area as well. A lot of us feel that I don't think, and I wanted to get your reaction to this. President Trump does not have any real true core belief system. I think he's an empty shell that is only. He only reacts and deals and functions in the currency of who likes me and what transactional thing can I get, and so so all these things have occurred. And Kenny's right. All these things do, if you do seem to be able to string these together. But I think that's happenstance. I think what really is that this man is devoid of any center and any actual compass, and all he does is react to what is going to. What transaction can I make with the right group of people that's going to benefit me? And so it ends up, this is what's ended up. I just want to get your reaction to that.
No, I listen, I agree with that totally. In fact, for many years, Trump was a Democrat. He supported, Hillary, supported Jesse Jackson. So I agree actually, but I have a slightly different reaction. I agree with you. He has no core. I agree with you. He's completely transactional. I agree with you. He's completely self-interested. But I always thought that because that's what he was, and if he wins a second term, again, I often say what most folks say. If he wins a second term, if that happens, and we have to face the reality that that's possible, I've always felt that Democrats should have, at least initially, fought him tooth and nail initially. And the reason why I say that is he has no core. That means he would sell out Mitch McConnell. He would sell out, in other words, I think when we had a 100% assault and we just decided we would not do business with Trump from day one, he's like anyone else, sort of put him in a box. But I think that one of the better strategy is to pull him away from the base by negotiating with him things that I believe he would leave the traditional Republican ideas for if it was not if it was in his best interest. I mean, lastly on that point, think about this. The man's got business interests in blue states, New York in particular. Unless we're willing to accept that he's just willing to spend the rest of his life in Florida, I think he will be looking for some opportunity to straighten out the absolute lack of popularity that he has in blue states. That's just political, but I agree with you. He has no core, and that is troublesome. And Kenny, I agree with you too. He has definitely challenged our institutions, stretched them, but I believe they're stronger than him.
So guys, well, at least I know it's been a minute. Let us bring in David because he's waiting in our green room, blue room, whatever we want to call it, and then introduce him and then let you come back and ask Comrade any questions you have about what he had to say. So Keisha, do we have David available now? And by the way, Comrade Michael is also a University of Penn alum, but he was...
Okay, all right. And Dave Holder too. All right.
Yes. We're looking for David there.
I can see David. We need to unmute.
There he is.
I'm here.
All right, great. Well, I can't see you, but I can hear you. So welcome. Thank you. Thank you for coming in on short notice. Both you and Comrade probably knew about this show less than 2 hours ago. I was on the way driving back home, and I just kind of wanted to hear from both of you guys. I gave my own introduction of Conrad, and I'll do the same for you, and then let you tell us about yourself a little bit. So I also met David when I was a freshman. I think he was a senior at the time. Are you class of '87?
That's right, I was.
Right, and so I didn't know him well, but I was sort of drawn to him. He just has a bit of a light in him. And I didn't realize until maybe 2 years ago when I met up with him in New Rochelle. Is it New Rochelle where your church is?
Yes, that's right. Yep.
In New Rochelle, that he was maybe the third generation of pastors in his family. But David has a very interesting path as well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. David Holder, fourth generation pastor. Didn't want to be a pastor. So went to business school, did the MBA thing out in LA at UCLA, and was doing this whole music industry thing, and then fell into the whole gospel music industry thing, trying to do the right thing, maybe be a good member at large at somebody's church. At large is the operative phrase, but when God calls you, I had this epiphany, long story short, that I was, everything that I did that had any meaning in my life, even my experiences I thought that weren't valuable, called me to plant a church, start a church from scratch. So I had that epiphany, tried to figure out what this business school thing would look like. But when you plant a church, you start from scratch. So all that business stuff I learned was very helpful in the process. So ended up, long story short, here in New Rochelle, planting a church. I'm from Jamaica, Queens originally. So yeah.
I also remember that you were a biological basis of behavior undergraduate major. And I was thinking, what in the heck is that?
Yeah, I still don't know what that is. No, I'm just kidding.
So what we're talking about today in general is the idea, and it's my idea although I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I feel like there's been a plan from the beginning by our president, wherein Steve Bannon had quite a bit to do with it up front. The gentleman from Breitbart, wherein he came and identified what he thought about the country, what he thought about black neighborhoods, what do you have to lose? Started stacking the benches with judges that would make certain decisions, made it popular again, which is what Making America Great Again maybe is, again, to be openly racist. And now I feel like it's about to incite some violence. But before you kind of chime in on that, if you don't mind, we've been a minute. I want Lisa to be able to ask Conrad about anything he said, and then also comment on what I just said and ask you anything she'd like to in your commentary. Go ahead, Elisa.
But you know what, Mr. Tiller, I wondered if the reason Kenny and I may feel the way we feel about the situation as becoming more volatile or more dangerous for us is because we don't live in such a densely Democratic area. I know living in East Texas is red forever. But do you think that it may be because your environment, you know that there's not as many people, like y'all don't have as many dualies in Brooklyn as we do here in East Texas?
Well, I definitely agree with that. And I think that one of the things I often try to share with people in this area is that this is a very large nation. And so you're absolutely right. What you're seeing in Texas and throughout different parts of this country in red states is very different than what we're seeing here. And so I think that is definitely an important factor. And you're right, I am in the safe environs of a blue state that is very anti-Trump. And so, but I will say this though, my confidence in the Republic and my confidence in the system of government we have, the checks and balances, is such that I believe that, again, if Democrats focus on getting out to vote, it almost is self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's what I'm concerned about. If we focus our energies, even the young people out in the street, rather than fighting or rioting, if they would just focus on turning out the vote, that's the best way to ensure Trump is gone. Because I believe between our Congress, the military, you name it, we will have a peaceful transfer of power as we have had for 45 other presidential elections and transitions.
So David, framed in what I introduced earlier, as well as the gunman recently, the 17-year-old, just kind of whatever you want to weigh in with your thoughts about what's going on today from your perspective as a pastor, or the politics of it, or just the human side. I think you're muted.
So I just started a podcast a few months ago. So I ran from church, had a podcast with one of my associate ministers, and ran home, jumped. I'm in my son's room, so that's why you see stuff behind me. If you see it, my 15-year-old son. But and we would just and he was preaching from Psalm 9 and 10. It's basically David, and he's praising God in the midst of all that's going on in this unjust world, and that he finds himself always kind of wanting to get back to the place where the people are. But and he talks about in Psalm 10 about being the wicked tracking them down, like from the back, right? It just Jacob Blake was tracked down. We are not void as pastors. Good friend Conrad will agree with me. We are not void as pastors of scripture that speaks to this time. Like it's everywhere,
right.
All over the place. If you did it with an open mind, you would see how God talks. Our faith, of course, respecting other people's faith. Our faith talks about this unjust world and this unjust nation. I mean, we talk about Israel falling and ultimately falling away from God in 586 BC. That's that is emblematic of what we see. But I'm very hopeful, as Conrad is, with what's happened, that we can turn this around. The brother, you know, we talked about the young brother 17 walking by strapped, and of course we all know if that was a black man, he wouldn't have got 10 feet. So you know, you just shake it. What do you say to that? It's horrific to think about, and see our brother Jacob Blake get shot and get tracked down by the wicked, as Psalm 10 talks about, from the back, and that's the nation's fault. And see, that's a big thing. It's the nation's fault, and so the nation needs to repent. Church that may for justice, lay for justice, we need to repent for the nation. So it's our responsibility, as Conrad's talking about, to go out and vote, and that's part of that process that I see theologically. So,
hey, Michael, do you have any questions for David or Conrad? And being of the Jewish faith, do you see any sort of similarities in David's thinking about what's going on now?
You know, I think that when you know, I'm coming at this from a slightly different kind of way the sources are dealt with on our side, but the truth is that when you talk to, yeah, Conrad, yeah, a little bit, right?
Right.
But nonetheless, you know, I have for the last, let's say, 6 or 7 years, every year I've had a child. I have 7 children. Every year, and this year included, I have a child studying full-time in Israel. My wife's an Israeli. We travel there a lot. When you speak to the Rebbeim, the leading sort of philosophic minds that lead the Orthodox world, there is no question that what keeps getting repeated over and over, and I think this speaks to what David said, is that all over, you know, the religious thought, we're in what we call it the footsteps of Mashiach, meaning the idea that there's so much going on. David's like nodding, right?
Yeah.
There's so much going on, and it all is leading in one direction. And you know, oftentimes the way, you know, Jewish thought talks about life and the world and God's hand in history is it's not always apparent until you look back. Meaning it's hard to see moving in front of you, but when you turn around and look behind you, and I think, you know, in our world, everyone can see it in their own life, how you ended up where you are, how you ended up in front of the people you're in front of. You always can see what you call the, you know, the hand of God, as it were, or providence would be another word for it, at work in every individual. And here we see it all moving in a direction, you know, that the world and history is certainly moving in a direction. And of course, you can't see it as it's unfolding in front of you. Most of my Israeli friends are all telling us it's time to leave. If you're Jewish, it's time to move. You know, and many families in our community here. I live in Denver, Colorado, and my friends around the country. Many families that I know, I can count at least 20 in the last 2 years who've all left and moved to Israel, because it feels like that it's big enough and it's pervasive enough that that's kind of the prevailing thought in our community, that this is all moving in a very particular direction historically that is way bigger than any individual. And Trump is here for a reason. There's a reason why he was installed. There's a reason why he is who he is. So yeah, I relate very strongly to everything David said on a very personal level.
Yeah, you know, and Conrad and David, we joke from time to time on this show because we all know each other. And I would say 2 things about when Michael kind of chimed in. He's offended if people thinks he's white, so it's very important to him that
very offended.
The distinction is that he is a Jewish man. The other part of that, sad but somewhat true, is that a lot of people in the Black community, including myself, who looked into recently places like Ghana, given some of the actions that they've taken to welcome folks back. However, but a part of those things we joke about that have a tinge of truth. But Michael, there's much more people. There are many more people in the Jewish community that, if they decide to, hey, you know, keep this thing going here and have a place in Israel, that can do that, versus masses of Black people who have the means to decide, you know, we don't like it here anymore and we're going to go. So with that said, there's a book that I can't remember the name of it because, unfortunately, or admittedly, I buy more books than I read. They always sort of like a smorgasbord. They always look good. But I think it's called The Next 100 Million. And it talks about how 2040 or 2050, white people in the United States will be the minority. We'll be a country, a majority of minorities. And again, back to my idea of what I see happening here is almost like the last stand. The things that are happening are so egregious that it feels to me like they're saying, listen, guys, this is our last stand, our last shot at it. I mean, people who stand in lockstep with the president, who are in the United States Senate, primarily Republicans, and the same in the House of Representatives, why are they doing these things? Do they sort of feel like this is their last opportunity to hold on to power? What do you think about that, Comrade?
Well, I think you really hit on what is the crux of the matter. We're basically in a cold civil war in the United States. I mean, and we just have to be honest about it. We have blue states that are largely liberal and have a particular worldview and outlook, and red states that are largely moderate and conservative. Of course, there are people who defy that broad definition in both states, both categories. But the point is, it's competing visions for what America will look like and what is the right way to live or what is appropriate. And, I go back to the election of Barack Obama because I always say it wasn't Trump that unleashed this, but it was the election of President Obama that released it. And I think as people in this country who've been accustomed to holding the levers of power deal with the fact that, the demographics are shifting and changing. And yes, it's the browning of America. I teach a class at City College on hip hop, the cultural sort of shift that has taken place among the younger demographic. So yes, I agree with you. There are some folks who feel like life has changed for them in a way that they are troubled by that. But, I think ultimately, though, Kenny, it's very important that's why a leader that can bring the nation together is going to be very important because, see, all of those people, they're not going anywhere and they matter. And we need the kind of leadership at the federal level, at the state level, and certainly in the Oval Office that it's not for that person, it's not a zero-sum game, but in fact can help to bring the nation together. And I think that, as David said, as Michael said, the conditions, the riots, the antagonism, the internet, the trolling is all leading us to a place perhaps where, God's hand is really going to make a change through the agency of some leader, some leaders, or something cataclysmic. I totally agree with that. And I hope that it ultimately results in a net positive and not a net negative, because we could go there too.
I fear those cataclysmic events, watching the things that I've watched that you and David are not privy to in the Northeast, like the guys playing war games in the woods, in the woods down here in the Southeast, and with all the assault rifles. Lisa, you want to chime in with something? What do you have? Questions for anyone, comments, and then I'll go back to David.
No, I think Donald Trump's a reflection. I think you're right. I think that I think when Barack Obama took presidency and that picture, the placemats you can buy each year, each election cycle, and it adds the new president. I think that there was a lot of Americans that change is uncomfortable for, and seeing that was like, wait a minute, because we've got to make sure some people stay in their place, because if some people do better than you, then you feel like you're getting left behind. I think Trump is a reflection, and I've said this since he ran. He's a reflection of who we've become as a country. We're a reality show country. We love the watching the drama from the outside, and now he's giving it to us and inciting it. And I think for me personally, down in the area I live, there's people who are not in my town, let it come here, and they're ready to participate in this drama. And I think that, as both Mr. Holder and Tillard were saying, that we've got to get out. We've got to go vote. You have to take the power where you can. Me walking down the street's not going to do much, because I'm not hitting anybody in their pocketbook. If I go and burn down a building, I'm not hitting them in their pocketbook. I've validated their points about what my convictions are. But if I go out and vote, if I can find a way to mess with their bottom dollar or their position in Washington, then we have power, and we've got to organize and come together, like you guys were saying, and get the electric. We've got to get our votes out. We've got to make sure that red states go blue if we can, or at least counties go blue if we can.
Yeah. And so Donald Trump really is a symptom of the problems that we had before, things that were underneath the belly. And Barack Obama, as a result of being elected, and Mitch McConnell and his band of buddies got together and said, we're going to make everything this guy ever tries to do fail. I've likened Donald Trump to the Frankenstein of Dr. Frankenstein, in reality here today, wherein I might label Mitch McConnell Dr. Frankenstein, who created Trump, who's now coming back and about to destroy him. The problem is that the monster now, sorry with that analogy, but the monster now has all these minions and zombies following him mindlessly. And so what I wanted to ask you about, David, is thinking about sort of where we were as a country. Certainly we made strides. Certainly many of the quotes and things that were said in the 50s and 40s and 30s or even 70s are true today, but we have made some strides. And so when you think about what was happening, I go on sort of a timeline, 1849, where Abraham Lincoln voted to abolish the slave trade in Washington, D.C., to 1854, where he spoke against the Kansas-Nebraska Act that was going to repeal anti-slavery provisions in Missouri, to 1857, where he speaks against the Dred Scott decision, which we all know denied constitutional protection and citizenship to Africans brought to the U.S., on down to 1862, when he was elected and Confederates fired on Fort Sumter, to the 1960s when the Civil Rights Act was passed. Do you think there's any will in the legislature, in the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate today, that any of those things would actually happen today? And then anything else you want to add?
Wow. That's a big question. I think that, I am, a quick study, if you will, or a long study of the history of the African-American church and the time of Reconstruction, where we started our own banks, we started our own schools, we started our own communities. And it seems that, and to say this, I think it seems that there is this resurgence of a perverted resurgence of rugged individualism that has come into play, where Trump is like, there is no community, if you will, and to separate everybody out. So I just, it's a longer story, but that for me is the opposite of what my faith tells me, that we are a community. And just like, I think it was it not Eisenhower, but talked about how they use the word socialism to talk about evil, when if they were to define socialism, Jesus would be a socialist, right? So we're in that place. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I don't see, especially on one side of the table, where, because they are minions, that there's any fear of God, and there is no moral compass. There is no standard, that there's no foundation of where's their faith. And what I'm repulsed at is all these people calling themselves Christians. I just want to, I regurgitate. It's sickening to me to see that, because there's no semblance of what they believe in. Even the politicians that has any resemblance to my faith, Old and New Testament. So I just, that's where I'm at. I try to answer your question, but.
Okay. No, just wanted to weigh in wherever you needed to.
Yeah.
Michael, anything there to add?
Sorry, I'm answering texts from the hospital. I have a sick baby. I'm trying to pull myself out of the political part of this intellectually and cognitively more and more, because I find that I myself am getting bogged down in negative emotions and anger, and I find that it's not helping me personally. And as a parent, as a pediatrician, as a grandfather, as all these things that inhabit 90% or all of my day, it's not helping me to immerse myself in the political back and forth and worrying about who's going to vote for who, because I can't control anything. And there's a Talmudic saying that man plans and God laughs. So
That's right.
so that's how I am trying to kind of get through each day. Like I said, I consume some of the news, but mostly when I'm engaging in these conversations and I'm thinking about it myself, I'm trying to put it on a higher plane and think more about it the way David and Mr. Tillard, express themselves, in terms of that. One of the reasons why Jewish men wear this all the time is because it's supposed to remind me that there's always something bigger above me. Like during my waking hours, it's supposed to provide. I don't always live up to that standard, but at least it's there, and that's how I'm trying to keep my mindset in a way where I'm not overcome, because I could see myself very easily being overwhelmed with at some levels anger, and then despair, and then hopelessness, and then all these other negative things because of the leadership and because of the message and all the things that I'm seeing. So I'm trying to focus on more of that growth mindset. Carol Dweck from Stanford, she's a child psychologist, talks about there's a way that we can foster in our kids a growth mindset, that it's not about outcome, it's about process, that it's about that everything you engage in, you don't fear obstacles, and you don't fear challenges, that you look at them all as opportunities to grow and learn and become better and move forward, and when you give kids that mindset, they're less likely to, when faced with challenges and faced with situations, they're less likely to give up and fold. And so that's how I'm trying to view all of this from a growth perspective, is that we're going through a tough time nationally, we're going through a tough time personally. That's why this group was formed. That's why Kenny brought us together, and that here's a chance that we can all, and as our country, will grow from this as well. I can only hope that's the case.
Yeah. Well, so often you guys have heard me say, I tend to want to stay away from the sheer politics of it, but we're in such a unique time right now that it's almost impossible not to be sucked into that. And so what I've done a lot of the last 3 years prior to the politics of it was just try to talk about Donald Trump as a man. Is he a person that you'd want your mother to marry? Is he a person that you'd want your daughter to date when they were teenagers? Is he a person that you want on the board of your organization? Is he a person you'd want to be friends with, right? That you'd want to have a beer with? And I've talked about those kinds of things. And I sort of snickered when you talked about stages of development as a human being, and how we have these stages that prepare us from other things in life, because certainly a 12-year-old can't handle what a 15-year-old can handle, what an 18-year-old can handle. But along those Erickson's stages of development, if you will, vis-a-vis a person who starts smoking marijuana at 15 and they still are smoking it at 40, the brain stops somewhere. And I just kind of wonder if this president got stuck somewhere in that developmental phase. So that's levity, but I'm serious. Lisa, what do you got?
When children at our school start to have developmental issues, or they're 4 years old and they're about to begin to read, and then all of a sudden their parents will come to me and go, oh my God, they're a baby, they're whining about this, they're whining about that. And I point out, I was like, before you'll see these grave strides in your child and they they figure out how to deal with the new knowledge that they have, you're going to see regression, because growth is sometimes scary, and reading is a grown-up activity. Like they associate that with someone much older, so it's a little scary to all of a sudden be able to do this. And I do that with almost every developmental stage. Before you get progress, you're going to have some regression. And so my hope, my optimistic hope for our country is that that's where we're at, that we're going to have some regression because some people were late to get on the train, and then we're going to have progress again. And I think our country has shown that we're capable of doing that. I feel, though, that it's getting there. My husband and I have joked many times that if the civil rights if the civil rights movement that our grandmothers were part of needed to happen today, I don't know if my generation would do it. Because we're really comfortable on Facebook. We are text board gangsters. We will go and start some.
Elisa, you're muted.
I think she muted herself.
Elisa, you muted yourself.
I'm sorry, I got it. I'm sorry. But the organization that it takes to make something like the civil rights movement happen again, I just don't have that much faith in my generation that would need to be the leader of that. And so I think it's going to be a little bit rougher of a road. And because so much social media, we talk about media playing into that. Well, we need to add the ideal of social media. You're getting to see these thoughts of people who don't have to look you in the face, and they can say whatever they want to say. And then when they look you in the face and you check them, when y'all were talking earlier about, Kenny, you were pointing out, like, would you want Donald Trump to date your mother? Would you want to have dinner with Donald Trump? Would you want him to help you change a tire? Like, no. But then they get on Facebook and they'll share this information. And I think that's where, for when it's hard for me to be positive, it is stuff like that really just makes me.
So an analogy that you made me think of when you talked about going steps backwards is, I made this analogy once before, in terms of new growth in a forest. Sometimes there are actually intentional burns to create new growth. And the most that I can get out of trying to be helpful out of this presidency is that I liken it to that intentional growth in the forest, where we burn it all down to create new growth. In other words, he's exposed some of the ugliness that was underneath the underbelly. And so for the first time in my life, although my whole life I've had interaction and relationships with Black people and white people and other, it's the first time in my life that I'm not talking about, and I hate throwing around labels, so I'm not talking about just liberal people, but it's the first time in my life that I've seen white people literally outraged. And on a weekly basis coming in and asking, hey, what can we do? What can we do about this? Not just sort of sweeping it under the carpet. And this is an interesting thing that I'll say with two pastors as guests. And then under the guise and umbrella of Christianity, just saying we're all God's children and we don't see race and we're not. I'm seeing white people for the first time say, you know what, this is a problem, and it's a serious problem, and we need to do something about it. Either one of you guys, David, Conrad, anything?
Well, let me just say this because I have to leave. I have an appointment that I'm 12 minutes over. But let me say this. First of all, it has been my pleasure to participate in this roundtable with Michael and David, Penn folks, and Alyssa. I have not met, but I love Kenny Fikes and what he has done over the years, and proud of him to see him develop into the man he has, his beautiful family. And I saw the pictures of Miles' wedding and all of that you're doing. Keep that up. Anytime I can come on, I will. But I just want to say, and I know David can agree with this, and I know Brother Michael will understand this as well. Yes, our country is in the midst of great upheaval. The civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, all of these movements, though they happened 50 years ago, what we're seeing today is the long culmination of those cries for justice, those critiquing and challenging of American institutions. Martin Luther King famously popularized the statement, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward right. And so when you see young people today, black, brown, red, yellow, in the streets, when you see the American people questioning institutions that, you know, Malcolm X taught us to question 50 years ago, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, people who were part of the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement that the country was not ready to listen to 50 years ago. And when you hear young people today saying Black Lives Matters and they're in the streets, it is because the moral arc of the universe is long and it bends toward right. America has been a nation that has largely been dominated by one race, and the reaction and the natural sort of tension that's taking place now is akin to a woman in labor. And America is in labor right now. And I see what's coming to birth is a radically new America. And I think overall, that's a very good thing. We will go through intense pressure, pain. We're doing that now, ugliness, the afterbirth and all of that. But at the end of that reality is a beautiful baby. And I believe America is being made today to be more inclusive, broader, and we're going to go through some stuff. And we got to learn to respect each other, red and blue. We got to find a way to come together. I mean, we got some differences. We got to find a way, because if we just dismiss each other, then that's not going to work either in the future. So I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. I really am. We've seen this before. We've seen Brother Michael Nebuchadnezzar. We've seen this before. And
we weren't big on him. We didn't love him so much.
Right. Well, I know, but I'm just saying we've seen Pharaoh. We've seen a lot of things, and yet we just continue to go, because I do believe God is in the midst of this, and the moral arc of the universe is long, but it does, I believe, bend toward right. Thank you so much, Kenny. God bless you all. Anytime. I'll be back.
And thank you for
I'll be back.
Thank you. Yes, we will hold you to that. Thank you for the compliments. Good to see you. I'm glad I got your right number today, because I thought you just weren't returning my texts and calls for a while.
No. Yeah, no, I changed my number.
And thank you for the hope. And I heard a sermon coming on with the birth of a baby in America.
That's right.
And David, I think that you can take us out. Brother Conrad, we'll see you later. Michael had to go take care of a baby.
Thank you.
This podcast from his
well,
office.
I'll leave off where Conrad left off. I'll begin where Conrad left off, and he talked about Isaiah 54. Talks about, as a pastor, I'm talking about this, right? Isaiah 54 talks about a barren woman. It talks about a woman who is not only childless, but a woman that has no husband, a family. It is talking about nation, the nation of Israel that has been exiled, that now is alone. But if you don't find out that God is going to rebuild that nation, that there's hope there, that that nation will be, that woman will be revealed, the nation of Israel, God's people, and where they are will be built with ruby and all these stones, these beautiful stones. So I have that kind of hope that goes my understanding that God in mind, as Michael's talking about all the mess that's out there, that I can ingest, totally explain, or don't even actually be honest with you, don't even want to deal with, right? Do we, any of us really want to deal with this mess, right? I mean, the ignorance is just like beyond you. It's so evil to me. So I have a lot of hope that Conrad describes in this nation that will rise again, but we're a bit in exile. So.
All right. Well, thank you for that hope again. Alita, you good? All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna be good.
All right. And Michael had to go take care of a baby. David, so good to see your smiling face. Thank you
Great
for
to
coming.
see you.
Thank you for coming on short notice.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. And we'll get together and chat about my podcast, your podcast, our podcast. And
Yeah,
see
right.
what we can do. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night, David.
Good night, Lisa. My pleasure to meet you.
You too.